The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 12 a.m. as Grace pulled into her driveway. Christmas Eve had arrived, but the joy of the season had been left behind somewhere between the third heart attack and the fifth accident victim at the city hospital. Her body ached from a 14-hour shift in the trauma unit, her scrubs heavy with the invisible weight of other people's pain. She rubbed her sore neck, clutching her keys, expecting to step into silence. Her husband, Mark, was still away on business until morning, and her 16-year-old daughter, Emma, had texted earlier that she'd gone to her grandparents for dinner. That single thought, her daughter spending Christmas Eve with family, had been the only light in Grace's long, exhausting day. When she unlocked the door, soft lamplight spilled into the living room. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Emma lay curled up on the sofa, still wearing her winter coat, her long dark hair half covering her face. The untouched plate of food beside her and the box of cookies she'd baked for her grandparents told their own quiet story. "Emma," Grace whispered, kneeling beside her. The girl stirred, blinking back sleep, her eyes red-rimmed. "Mom," she murmured, forcing a smile that trembled at the corners. "You're home early." Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "What happened, sweetheart?" Grace asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. The beautiful red dress Emma had spent weeks choosing was wrinkled beneath her coat. She had tried that dress on so many times, asking if it was fancy enough for Grandma's dinner. Now it looked crushed and forgotten like her spirit. "Nothing," Emma whispered, pretending to shrug it off. "I just didn't stay long." Grace took her cold hands, feeling the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Please tell me," she urged gently. Emma looked down, tears glistening on her lashes. "Grandma said there was no room at the table." Grace froze. "No room." Her voice barely escaped her throat. "There were a lot of people," Emma said softly. "Neighbors, Dad's cousins, even Grandma's bridge club friends." Her voice faltered. "I parked outside like Uncle Jack always does, checked my hair 100 times, then rang the doorbell." Grace nodded, fighting the lump in her throat. "And?" Grandma smiled that fake smile and said, "Oh, we weren't expecting you until your mother arrived." Emma's voice cracked. "I saw everyone already sitting at the big table. 26 people, Mom. But no chair for me." Grace's heart shattered quietly inside her chest. "What did you do then?" she asked. Emma stared at the floor. "She said the guest room was full of coats, but I could wait in the kitchen if I wanted." Aunt Lisa just stared at her plate. "Oh." "I left the gifts and cookies and drove home." Grace's eyes filled as she pulled her daughter close. "You drove home alone in the rain?" Emma nodded. "It wasn't so bad," she whispered, though her trembling voice told another story. Grace held her tighter, whispering through tears. "It's okay, baby. You're home now. And I promise, never again." When Emma finally fell asleep, Grace stood watching her for a long time. The girl's face, soft under the warm glow of the lamp, still carried traces of sadness. Grace brushed a tear from her cheek, whispering, "They didn't run out of chairs, baby. They just didn't make one for you." The house was quiet except for the ticking clock and the sound of the rain tapping against the windows. Grace turned off the light and stood in the dark hallway, her heart aching with a mix of anger and realization that something inside her had broken forever. The next morning, Grace sat at the kitchen table, still wearing her robe, staring at the folder she'd pulled from her office drawer. Inside were years of bank records, utility bills, and payment receipts. Her husband, Mark, poured her a cup of coffee, studying her expression. "You're up early," he said quietly. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. Grace flipped through the pages, her finger tracing the numbers she knew too well. "I've been paying their bills for 8 years, she whispered. Mark frowned. "All of them?" She nodded slowly. "Mortgage, utilities, taxes. Everything." Mark leaned closer, his tone steady but full of disbelief. "You mean the house your parents live in?" Grace nodded. "Yes. It's in my name, Mark. I bought it outright after Dad lost his job. I didn't want them to lose everything." She sighed deeply, the weight of years pressing against her chest. Every month I sent money, made excuses for their coldness, told myself they just needed time. Mark reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. You've been carrying them, Grace. And they've been crushing your daughter. The words struck her like lightning. Crushing your daughter. Grace opened another folder, one filled with small notes, letters, and birthday cards. She picked one at random, a birthday card from her parents. Inside, a small $20 bill for Emma. The next one, for her sister's children, held a check for $200. Every year it's the same, Grace murmured, her voice trembling. They treat Emma like she doesn't belong. Mark's jaw tightened. And you kept helping them. Grace nodded, tears spilling onto the papers. Because I thought it was what a good daughter should do. Later that afternoon, Grace found herself sitting on the edge of Emma's bed, holding a small sketchbook she'd discovered beneath her pillow. Can I read it? She asked. Emma nodded softly. Page after page revealed drawings and short notes, moments of pain hidden in plain sight. Grandma said my award wasn't real. They didn't have space in the car again. Grace closed the book, her throat tight. You've been protecting me, she whispered. Emma looked up, tears glimmering in her eyes. I didn't want to make it worse for you, Mom. Grace pulled her into a trembling embrace. Not anymore, she said. This ends now. The next morning, Grace sat with Mark at the kitchen table again, surrounded by documents spread like puzzle pieces of her past. Property tax statements, bank transfers, and bills formed a trail of quiet sacrifice. You've paid over $100,000, Mark said softly after doing the math. Grace's fingers trembled as she flipped through another receipt. They never even thanked me, she whispered. All this time I thought I was saving them. But I was only feeding their pride. Mark's expression hardened. And while you kept giving, they kept hurting your daughter. That same morning, Grace made a call to Sarah Williams, an old friend and lawyer. Within an hour, Sarah was at the house, her sharp eyes scanning the papers. The house is yours, Grace. Legally, your parents are tenants without any agreement, she said firmly. Grace hesitated. It feels cruel, she admitted, her old guilt rising. Sarah looked at her with steady compassion. Is it cruel to protect your child? Or cruel to keep letting them break her heart? The question struck deeper than Grace expected. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. Later that day, Grace went upstairs to find Emma sitting by her window, sketching quietly. The light from outside danced on her face. We're not going to your grandparents' house anymore, Grace said gently. Emma turned slowly, searching her mother's eyes. Really? Grace nodded. Really? There will be some other changes too. She explained about the money, the house, and the lawyer's advice. Emma's eyes widened. But they're your parents. Grace smiled faintly. And you're my daughter. That's the difference. You're my family now. That evening, Grace sat alone at the dining table with two letters before her. One was a 60-day eviction notice, the other a termination of financial support. Both documents symbolized the years of silence and sacrifice she had endured. Her hand didn't shake as she signed them. Mark stood in the doorway, his voice soft but steady. Are you okay? No, she replied honestly. But I will be. She sealed both envelopes, pressing her fingers over the edge as if sealing a promise to herself, that her daughter would never cry over that family again. 3 days later, the calm broke. The torn halves of the eviction notice lay on Grace's porch, fluttering in the cold wind. Her mother stood above them, fury burning in her eyes. This is how you repay everything we've done for you, she yelled. After all our sacrifices. Grace leaned against the doorframe, her voice calm but firm. You'll need to vacate in 60 days, as required by law. Her mother sneered. You've always been selfish. Grace nodded slowly. If protecting my daughter makes me selfish, then yes, I am. By evening the phone calls started. First came her father's voice, low and weary. Grace, your mother's heartbroken. Don't destroy this family over nothing. Then her sister Lisa, posted a long Facebook message painting Grace as cold and ungrateful. "Pray for my poor parents who are losing their home," it read. By noon the next day, 17 relatives had shared it. Grace sat at her kitchen counter, reading it once before deleting the post from her feed. "They can control their story," she murmured. "But I'll control my peace." At the bank, Grace sat across from the manager, her expression calm. "I'd like to end all automatic payments to this account," she said, sliding the papers forward. The man hesitated. "These payments have been active for 8 years, Mrs. Bennet. Are you sure?" "Completely sure," she said, her tone firm but polite. As he processed the request, she exhaled slowly, feeling something heavy lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, her life and her money belonged to her again. Back home, Grace scanned and saved all her financial records into a folder labeled Documentation. Property deeds, payment proofs, and screenshots of Lisa's posts went neatly inside. She started a second file, Communication Timeline, where she wrote down every call, message, and visit. As she typed, she whispered to herself, "Their tears never stopped them from hurting Emma. Mine won't stop me from protecting her." Mark entered quietly, setting a small box beside her. "Security cameras," he said. "I'll install them tomorrow." Grace smiled faintly. "Good. Let's make sure peace stays protected." A few days later, her mother cornered her outside the hospital after her night shift. The parking lot lights flickered coldly as Helen, her mother, stepped in front of her. "After all we've done for you, this is how you thank us," she snapped. Grace's voice was steady. "What you did to Emma is unforgivable. This is about one dinner." Helen shouted. "You're throwing your parents onto the street for one dinner?" Grace shook her head. "No, Mum. I'm ending years of disrespect. You told my daughter she had no place at the table. Now you have none at mine." 2 nurses passing by paused at the scene. One of them, Jennifer, called out, "She paid your bills for 8 years, ma'am." Helen's face turned red with embarrassment. "This is a private matter," she barked. "Not when you humiliate my colleague in public," Jennifer replied sharply. Grace gave her a grateful nod before walking away, her heart pounding but steady. As she reached her car, she realized something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. The kind that comes not from escape, but from finally standing tall after being made small for too long. The next day, Grace received a call from Pastor Thomas, the family's old church minister. "Your mother spoke at the prayer group," he said carefully. "She's told everyone you've turned against your parents." Grace sighed, rubbing her temple. "I figured she would." His voice softened. "I reminded them that boundaries aren't unchristian, Grace. Sometimes protecting your child is the most sacred thing a parent can do." For the first time in weeks, Grace's eyes filled with tears, not of guilt but of gratitude. That same week, Emma's therapist, Dr. Winters, called Grace into her office. "Your daughter's showing signs of deep emotional exclusion," she explained gently. "This wasn't an accident, Grace. It was a pattern, intentional rejection." Grace swallowed hard, listening in silence. "You made the right choice cutting ties," Dr. Winters continued. "Maya's," she stopped herself correcting. "Emma's self-worth depends on this boundary." Grace nodded slowly, clutching her bag tighter. "Then it's final," she whispered. "They're not welcome in our lives anymore." On day 35 of the 60-day notice, Grace sat at her desk, organizing her growing file of evidence. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. Mark opened the door to find a delivery man holding a thick envelope. Inside was the official copy of the eviction notice, delivered not to her parents' house but to Lisa's. Grace blinked, realizing the lawyer had chosen the location deliberately. "They'll all be there for Sunday dinner," Sarah, her lawyer, had said earlier. "Let the truth arrive where the lies began." Grace couldn't help a faint, grim smile. By that evening the phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Cousin Martha called first. "Grace, is it true? They've been living in a house you own?" she asked, stunned. Grace nodded, though Martha couldn't see her. "Yes. I bought it when they were about to lose everything. And you've been paying all their bills. Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. For 8 years, Grace said quietly. And still, they told Emma there wasn't room at the table. Silence filled the line, then Martha said softly, "That sounds like your mother." It was the first honest support Grace had heard from family in years. Within days, the gossip that once painted Grace as a villain began to crumble. Relatives who had once accused her of cruelty now called in quiet apology. Aunt Susan stopped sharing Lisa's posts. Uncle Robert admitted he had no idea Grace owned the house. Slowly the tide turned. Grace didn't gloat. She simply printed every message and placed it in her file, each one a small piece of validation that truth always outlasts manipulation. "Let them make their choices," Sarah told her. "We'll document the consequences." On the 45th day, Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "We need to talk. Alone." The words felt oddly sincere, like the last flicker of a dying flame. Grace hesitated, then replied, "Okay. Coffee shop. Tomorrow at 10. When she told Mark, he frowned. "Be careful," he said. "They'll try to guilt you again." Grace smiled faintly. "I'm ready for that now." She spent the night reviewing her notes and replaying the advice Sarah had given her. Acknowledge their feelings, but don't accept responsibility. For the first time, she believed she could do it. The next morning, Grace arrived at the cafe early and sat near the corner window. Her phone was set to record, hidden beneath a photo screensaver of Emma smiling. When Lisa entered, she looked tired. Mascara smudged, her once perfect posture slightly bent. "You look worn out," Grace said softly. Lisa didn't respond. "Mom's heartbroken," she began, stirring her coffee nervously. "We need to stick together, Grace. That's what family does." Grace said nothing, her silence forcing Lisa to fill it. "They don't believe you'll go through with the eviction," Lisa added. "They think you'll come to your senses." Grace leaned forward. "They've had 45 days, Lisa. Have they even started packing?" Lisa's eyes darted away. "It's hard for them, Grace. They're old. Where will they go?" Grace exhaled slowly. "They should have thought of that before they humiliated my daughter." Lisa's voice grew pleading. "If you'll stop this madness, they'll make sure Emma's included next time." Grace stared at her, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "Next time," she repeated coldly. "There won't be a next time." She slid a paper across the table, Emma's timeline of exclusions. "Read it. Then tell me this is just about one dinner." Lisa looked at the list but didn't touch it. Each line carried years of memories, birthdays, holidays, and school events Emma had been excluded from. "Did you ever once stand up for her?" Grace asked quietly. Lisa's silence answered for her. "The eviction stands," Grace said firmly. "The financial help ends today." "You can't do that," Lisa whispered. "They'll have nowhere to go." Grace stood, collecting the paper. "Their emergency doesn't make it my crisis," she said calmly. "Not anymore." And for the first time, Lisa had no words left. As Grace drove home, the city lights blurred past her windshield like falling stars. Mark reached over and took her hand. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "They haven't filed any challenges. Legally, you're in the clear." Grace nodded, staring ahead. "It's not about legal, Mark. It's about peace." When they reached home, Emma greeted her at the door, smiling brighter than she had in months. "Everything okay?" she asked. Grace wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Everything's better than okay," she whispered. "For the first time, we're free." The days passed quietly, each one bringing Grace closer to the eviction deadline. Her parents' calls turned from anger to desperation, and then to guilt. "You're destroying this family," her father's voice pleaded in another voicemail. "Your mother can't sleep." Grace listened once, then deleted it. The guilt that used to eat at her was gone. Every deleted message was a small act of freedom, a reminder that love should never feel like punishment. Each sunrise made her resolve stronger. She was finally taking her life back. By the 50th day, even her sister Lisa had stopped pretending everything was fine. Through mutual relatives, Grace learned that her parents had tried to move into Lisa's house, but the plan ended in shouting and slammed doors. "They're running out of places to hide," Mark said one evening, scrolling through his phone. Grace stirred her tea calmly. "They built this cage themselves," she replied. There was no hate in her voice, only acceptance. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to fix anyone. Late one rainy evening, the doorbell rang. Through the security camera, Grace saw Lisa standing in the rain, clutching her purse like it held her last hope. "We just need a little help," Lisa said when Grace opened the door. "A loan for the deposit. I'll pay you back." Grace shook her head gently. "You watched them humiliate my daughter and said nothing." Lisa's eyes welled. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." Grace sighed. "That was your choice, Lisa. This is mine." She closed the door softly, her heart steady. Upstairs, Emma had seen everything from her window. She turned when Grace entered, her eyes worried. "Are you okay, Mom?" Grace smiled faintly. "Better than okay," she said. "I think I'm finally free." Emma hugged her tightly. "You didn't just protect me," she whispered. "You protected yourself too." Grace stroked her daughter's hair. "Maybe that's what real strength looks like," she murmured. "Choosing peace over guilt." For the first time in years, both of them slept through the night without waking to old pain. 2 days before the deadline, 6 cars pulled into the driveway, the family's final attempt to break her. "They're here," Grace said quietly. Mark stood from the table. "Let's get this over with." When she opened the door, her mother led the group like a queen of pity, flanked by uncles and aunts carrying forced concern. "We need to talk as a family," Helen announced, brushing past Grace into the house. Grace followed slowly, the weight of years trailing behind her but no longer pressing her down. Her father began, voice thick with judgment. "The Bible says honor your father and mother. Have you forgotten that?" Aunt Louise chimed in. "They're old, Grace. You can't throw them out like strangers." Helen dabbed her eyes. "We just misunderstood Christmas Eve. You're blowing this out of proportion." When Emma entered the room, Helen turned sharply toward her. "Do you really want people saying you made your grandparents homeless?" The word struck like a slap. Emma's eyes filled instantly. Grace reached for her hand and said quietly, "That's enough." The room went silent. Grace's voice was calm but filled with strength. "You told my daughter there wasn't room at your table. You excluded her again and again. And now you stand here asking for mercy." Her mother's expression hardened. "We're family," she hissed. "We forgive each other." Grace shook her head. "No, we don't. Not when forgiveness is used as a leash." Aunt Louise tried again. "Just one more month." Grace's reply came cold and steady. "I've already given them 8 years. That's long enough." That night, the house felt lighter. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed while Grace folded her clothes quietly. "Mom," Emma said softly, "was it cruel to make them leave?" Grace smiled sadly. "Cruelty wants to hurt, honey. Boundaries want to heal." Emma nodded slowly. "Like that Christmas Eve, when Grandma said there was no room, even though there were empty chairs." Grace paused, remembering. "Exactly," she whispered. "And now we're building a table where everyone truly belongs." Emma smiled, the weight in her chest finally lifting. The final morning arrived crisp and still. The clock read noon as the old Buick pulled into the driveway, followed by a small moving truck. Sarah, the lawyer, waited quietly in the kitchen. Grace opened the door before they could knock. Her mother's face was tight with anger. "After all we've done for you," she snapped. Grace looked her straight in the eyes. "You didn't do it for me, Mom. You did it to control me. But that ends today." Her father said nothing, only nodding faintly, the first honest gesture she'd seen in years. Helen signed the release papers with a trembling hand, her voice shaking. "You'll regret this, Grace," she said, tossing the house keys on the table. Grace picked them up calmly. I already regret the years I let you hurt my daughter." 2 hours later the truck was gone, and the house stood quiet again. Grace, Mark, and Emma watched from the doorway as sunlight poured across the living room. "No empty chairs," Grace whispered. Emma smiled beside her. "No empty hearts either." And with that they closed the door, not in anger but in peace.